Welcome to the Innovation Conversation, a podcast about innovators, both in business and real life. Hosted by myself, Ricardo Pascual, and Harry McDonough.
This podcast is sponsored by OpenExperts.com. Open Experts is a place to go if you're looking to talk with top experts from around the world. That is open-experts.com. This podcast is also sponsored by startupnetworks.co.uk. Startup Networks, it's an online forum where you can find all the resources you need to run your startup. From grants to investors to tips and tricks on how to be successful in your startup.
This podcast is also sponsored by ODEV Tech. ODEV Tech is your premier software development partner. Make sure to check them out at odev.tech. Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Innovation Conversation. Today we are joined by Daniel Pidcock. Daniel, welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me, Ricardo.
It's a pleasure having you here. Daniel, would you like to tell the audience a little bit more about yourself?
So I am a designer and UX researcher. My background is graphic design. I always wanted to be a designer from a very young age. In fact, I got my very first paid design gig when I was just 14. And throughout my career, I've worked through 4 companies, big companies like Just Eat and Honda, Royal Navy and such like, a lot of startups. And I've also founded and built my own companies and startups over time as well. I'm currently the founder of Gleanly, which is a UX repository storing knowledge in the form of atomic UX research, which is a process I invented while I was at Just Eat.
Interesting. In all your years in this industry, I'm sure you've seen a lot. So, when you launched your own company, how was that journey? Was it a bit scary, or actually you knew exactly what you're doing and everything went perfect from day one?
I founded quite a few in my time, and some of them deliberately and some of them accidentally. So there's at least 2 companies, Gleanly being one, where there wasn't an intention to build a company. In fact, so we built Gleanly as a tool to help people who are using the atomic UX research process better deliver it, right? And actually, I was quite dogmatic at the beginning to say we shouldn't ever have specific tooling. The process should always be able to be used with whatever you've got on hand. And I still think that's true, but there was a few things we just wanted to be able to achieve, and we ended up building a tool. So yeah, I wouldn't say it was scary. It was kind of it was a natural progression. And there was another situation in the past where, once again, I accidentally built a business. I wasn't intending to. I was, kind of, my problem is I'm ADHD and a creative. And if there's a problem, I want to solve it. And sometimes I can do that through my role, whoever I'm working for, wherever I'm working. Sometimes it's something you can do as more like a society thing. Or sometimes no, there needs to be a tool built for this, or there needs to be a product that does this, or a service that does this. No one else is going to do it, so I suppose I'll have to do it now. But I can't leave it alone. That's the problem.
It's quite interesting because most of the people I talk to are either investors or startups, right? And a lot of the startups, they haven't done that many startups before. They're probably on the second startup at best. But you've gone through multiple startups. So I guess the big question is, what makes it successful? Like, how do you know you're going to be successful in a startup? Is there any tips or tricks you can give to the audience?
I don't think you can. I think the number one thing is being passionate about the subject matter. You have to have love for whatever you're building or whatever you're creating, whatever the company is. I know people have been successful, depending on how you measure that, through things that they're maybe not particularly excited by and they're just doing it to make money. I'm sure that's the case. But I suppose, first of all, is that a measure of success? And secondly, for me at least, I find that it's difficult. It's a stressful thing. It can be, you have ups and downs. It's like a roller coaster with a startup. And if you're not fundamentally in love with what you're doing and passionate about delivering that thing, as soon as it gets difficult, it's going to be hard to carry on, I think, for a lot of people, especially myself, right? So yeah, I think that for me, that's the fundamental thing, is to love the product. The problem with that is, for myself, I don't really consider myself as a business person. I see myself as like a product designer or as a creator in that. And so sometimes my decisions can be more focused on the product or delivering something rather than necessarily what's financially the correct thing to do. And I think that's sometimes been a challenge for me personally.
Do you drive your investors like mad for the fact that you focus on everything but profitability, or how do you manage that relationship?
Why are we still spending so much money on developers when the product works? It's people are buying it, it's selling. Like stop building new features and pushing it forward. But I've got a vision. I know where I want it to be, and I know that we can drive value with a better product. And if you sit on your laurels, if you're not pushing forward, then someone's going to come along and do it better, or do it cheaper, or just have more of a marketing budget and be able to overtake you, right? So that's how we drive forward. But mostly the reason is that that's less of a rational thing that I'm making out. It's because that's what I'm interested in. That's what I'm focused on. And, I've been quite open that at some point I'll be replaced as CEO. I know that will be the case because I'm not a CEO. I'm the person who's passionate about the product. I'll always be passionate about that. But maybe, at some stage it'll be the right time to bring someone in who's more focused on the business.
Interesting. And you mentioned something quite interesting, which is the combination of passion and vision. Now, multiple businesses, you obviously have quite a lot of baggage in this and know your stuff. But did you find that it is easier to go and ask for investment from investors when you bring these two things to the table? Like you're passionate about it, they have a vision. Do you think that's often the deciding factor between them investing or not?
No, I'd maybe even say the opposite. I'll go in and go, look, we've got this really cool idea. We know we can do this. We know this is a problem that needs solving, and we believe we've got the evidence to show that we're capable of doing that. But I think for a lot of investors that I've spoken to, there are some that kind of, they're excited about that as well, and they can see the opportunity there. But what they really want to know, I suppose, is, well, what's going to happen to my investment? How quickly will I get that back? How much will it grow, etc.? What's the next step? Are you going to get more investment later on? And it may be slightly controversial to say, but I don't think there's many investment organizations that I've met that are actually interested in creating a product or a stable business. What they're looking for is to get to the next round. And sometimes, maybe even commonly, that isn't necessarily what's right for the business or the organization or the customers. There's a famous phrase at the moment, I'm sure you heard, like the end-shittening of technology, where, the only growth can be got by making products worse, putting more ads on Spotify or pushing, on Netflix, even if you're paying, I'm pointing at my TV there, but you're paying for Netflix and now you're showing me ads. Surely that was the entire point of having Netflix in the first place. There's so many examples I can give, right? And that's all coming from driving growth. And what's going to happen, and I'm starting to see that with a few organizations, they're getting to the point. I've cancelled my Spotify subscription recently due to political reasons, but mostly, fundamentally, the product quality has dropped so severely. And it's not like they're paying musicians and such like, so where's that money going? It's just
exactly.
I think Spotify is going to fold at some point because someone will come along and go, actually, we can do Spotify, but better, which is what Spotify was, right? So I think there's almost like too much of a short-term vision. Now, this is someone speaking who isn't a billionaire, hasn't created a product of that size and that scale, but have worked within businesses that are, some of the work that I did with Just Eat got it to FTSE 100 a year earlier than it was estimated to, which I'm quite proud of. But the things that I'm most proud of is where we fundamentally moved that product forward as a good quality product and protected it from the kind of temporization and shitifying. For example, bringing in like better accessibility, which was profitable for them, but it was costly and it was maybe a bit dry and maybe not what investors and shareholders would have been interested in. But it was important and it was the right thing to do, right? And then built a better product. And I think it protects them long term.
This is actually quite interesting because you touch on a very interesting topic, which is the things that investors look for in a company and in a product might not necessarily be what's best for the company, the product, or even the consumers. Because they're just looking at the bottom line. The bottom line is, are you increasing revenue or not? Am I getting my money in 100x or 1000x or not? So it comes down to that, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, as a good example is, obviously this is a world I know fairly well from work. I mentioned Just Eat earlier. But when COVID hit, we saw companies like Deliveroo really start to struggle, because suddenly so many people were ordering food and Deliveroo was having so many more orders. Well, surely that's a good thing. Surely that makes them more profitable. No, because they lost money on every single order. And they basically had investment, they had money, they were looking for growth, looking for scale and such like, and they had money to their burn rate to go. And then suddenly COVID hit and they were burning through that cash so much quicker than they were expecting. Now to me, and this is me not being an investor, maybe being quite naive, that doesn't sound like a business to me. That sounds like some kind of food charity where we're going to pay you to have food delivered. It doesn't make sense to me, right? And I understand kind of the scales. One thing Just Eat always said is that if they couldn't be number one in a market, they would either buy number two or leave the market. They always need to be number one. What they defined as number one was at least 40% bigger than number two. And the reason for that is they just couldn't be profitable otherwise. But there's so many, especially tech businesses out there, it seems to be really endemic in the tech world, where there is no monetization side. It is a case of getting scale, and then going through a shitting process where we give, we lose money. Right, now we've got market share. What we do now is we just wring out those customers for the profit that we haven't been having. Why not instead just build a profitable business from, when Gleanly, my business, went live in, I think it was September, we went live. Within 3 months, we were technically profitable, not by a big amount, but we could cover our own costs. Now, last year was the COVID of the UX world. We knew something was going on in December 2022 because Christmas is our biggest busy period, weirdly. It's when there's less projects going on and people can focus on stuff that like knowledge management and such like. They put their projects down for a bit. And we didn't have weren't quite as busy as we were expecting. Some of the deals that we were hoping to close didn't seem to be. And then we noticed that some of the renewals that we were hoping for weren't happening. We're like, oh, what's going on here? Over the next month or so, especially March was the peak time, companies just started wiping out, not just UX, but I think when I've looked at the numbers, it looks like UX was less affected because, for every 5 developers that were fired, 1 UX was. But then most companies, there's normally about 20 developers to 1 UX. So I think there was about 4 times more UX people and research designers, those kind of people, those people adjacent to knowledge and research getting fired. And certainly I know of many of the companies we were working with, whole teams disappeared. They had no UX people left anymore. Which fundamentally speaks, I think this is going slightly off subject, but it fundamentally speaks to a failure within my industry for not really showing its value and not proving itself that they felt that that could be done. But from our business point of view, which is a subscription-based business and relies on that renewal and like either monthly or annual renewal, it meant that not only were we not closing or not getting new business as much, but a lot of the companies that have been with us from day one, if not even before that, suddenly weren't renewing. There's literally nothing we could do about it because they weren't there anymore. There was no failure from our side. It doesn't matter what a product or what a price it was or anything like that. Just literally there weren't people there who needed it anymore. Now, we were able to bear that out. It was bloody difficult, but we were able to bear that out because we built a sustainable business. We weren't debt based. We weren't based on projected growth. We were hoping for growth. We had a really good year planned out. And I'm glad to say that we're back on track with that now, better than ever, in fact. But it meant that suddenly for a year, we had to kind of shore up a little bit. Now, this is where my investors were going, stop spending money on product and probably that would have been a better thing to do. We'd probably have more money in the bank, but I would have lost all that knowledge and all that talent and all of the people who, luckily I built a really good relationship with my team, that when there was a couple of months that we did have a shortfall and I said, guys, look, we're not going to be able to make the next round of invoices, they're able to go, it's all right, you're fine, we can hold off for a month or two. In fact, the first time I remember I went to my developers and said, yeah, we've got some scary months coming up. There's a big renewal happening this month, but if that doesn't come in for any reason, we might have a trouble. And then this next month, it looks like it's going to be short. I was really open and honest with them. And anyway, so I said, there may be a chance next month I won't be able to pay your bills this month. It might be a month or two afterwards. But we've got this one, which I've already guaranteed is coming in. in 2 months' time. And they went back and said, we'll just have to go and have a think about this. And I was like, oh no, I'm going to lose them. They came back and they said, right, we've looked at our figures. We can go 6 months without being paid. I was like, what?
Wow, that's a lot of commitment right there.
Yeah. And I was like, I don't need that. They went, no, we know that. We know you don't need it. Hopefully it will come in the next 2 months. So anyway, just to let you know, we can go 6 months and we're willing to go 6 months. We can afford to go 6 months. And, if that's okay. And I was like, yeah.
Did they have shares in the business? Or because that's a really big... Did they have shares on just normal employees?
Yeah.
Wow.
So,
I mean,
but they kind of, their rationale was, they trusted me. I'd always been open to them. I'd been really clear all the way before that. I'll move on to another story with the opposite of this after. But I'd always been really open to them about, financially how we're doing, what's happening, and they're included in all of that. It's completely transparent. But more than anything, they enjoyed and loved working on the product. So they enjoy working in the business with the team, but they also cared about the product, and they believe in the product, and they understood the situation. It wasn't a failure, and they realized that this would, we saw March was a massive drop down, and then from March it started climbing up slightly slow. There were still people firing, but people were starting to get rehired slowly. And actually, in the end, that ended up being a boon for us because the product is good enough. One of our biggest growth areas is people leaving a business and taking us elsewhere. And it's one of my proudest metrics is that so often on a sales call, we see someone who was in a different business. They've joined a new company. One of the first things they've done is they said, right, we need to use Leanly. Well, that wouldn't have happened if we treated them like shit or took advantage of them and didn't look, try and always build the best product we could for them. Not to say a product's perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I kind of feel that that's what saved our lives is caring about the product in the first place and our team, and caring about our customers and delivering a good product to them. So, but then, we're not the size of Spotify either, so maybe I'm wrong.
I don't think you are. It's actually quite interesting because I was just thinking about what leadership tricks and tips you can give to people, because this is it's a testament to a true leader when you get people coming back to you and say, hey, we can go for 6 months without pay because we believe in what we're doing and we believe in everything that you stand for. That speaks volumes, right?
I'd like to think so. I was shocked by it. I was blown away. It was really quite an emotional thing to happen as well. It wasn't something I was ashamed that there was even going to be a month where we had to cover them, and there was a few months then and afterwards where that happened, and it was nice that I had that to fall back on. We never had to borrow money extra. We didn't have to do like bridge loans or anything like that, or sell off shares for, too low to cover us over or anything like that. So it literally they saved our business's life, I would say, and I'll always be grateful for that. But you could also make the argument that they shouldn't necessarily been in the business at all at the time. That burn rate could have been so much lower. We could have more money in the bank if we had just focused on growth and reinvesting into marketing and stuff rather than building the product. But I don't know, it's a difficult one. And as a researcher, what's really difficult is I can tell anecdotes, but that might have been very specific to them. I don't have like a control to say, well, actually, if we'd done it the opposite way around, it would have been less successful and more successful.
Okay.
I can't, right? So yeah, I think my policy has always been transparency and honesty. And I've seen the opposite. So I said, I'll show you an example of the opposite of that happening. I remember when I was working, I'm not going to mention any names very carefully here, but for a lot of my career, I've worked as a contractor. And quite often because you're a contractor and brought in to deal with certain problems, you're quite exposed to kind of the inner workings of an organization, but still kind of slightly from the outside, which is interesting. So there was a company I was working for, and I'd been there for about 3 months for a 6-month contract. And they said that I was in a meeting with the board and senior people there, and they said, look, we've got cash flow issues coming up. What we're going to do is fire a load of people. We need to get rid of about 50 people from our organisation. And it's a medium-sized organisation. I think I would say they had about 250 people. So it's a significant portion.
It's a big number,
yeah. Now, to do that in the UK, you can't have contractors and fire permanent staff. You have to get rid of the contractors first, because they were like, well, why obviously that role must be available. Otherwise, you wouldn't be contracting people for it. So they said, sorry, Dan, you guys are going to have to go. So don't tell anyone. We're going to announce it next Thursday. So keep this under your hat. No problem. Next Thursday rolls around. They have a big announcement. They're like, well, we've got good news. Everyone's been complaining we're spending too much on contractors when we should be hiring perm staff, investing in our perm staff. So we've made the decision. We're getting rid of contractors. And I was like, hold up. No, you're getting rid of contractors so you can fire them. It was just the most incredible. But the thing is, of course, that didn't work. They completely lied through their teeth. And word quickly got around of the truth of the matter. Someone blabbed and someone told someone like, yeah, just between you and I, update your CV. And they told someone else they know, and said, between you and I, update your CV. Before you know it, at the end of there was a month in, they'd already lost about 40% of their staff. Good news, they didn't have to fire people. The bad news is that was mostly the best people they had, the people who could easily just turn around and get a job somewhere else. And the amount of drain of the knowledge out of it. I mean, obviously that's kind of my subject matter as well, as recording knowledge. So when you lose people, they didn't have a good knowledge management system. And even if you did, you still all that talent and people that had left a perfectly functional business. They weren't even. It wasn't that they had a cash flow problem that they were going in debt. It was just that they wanted to balance out a little bit more, maybe have a little bit, show a little bit more profit to the investors. And they turned what could have been, a little bit of a difficult conversation with the shareholders into a dramatic issue, which nearly killed the business. So,
isn't that what happened with Boeing, for example? We've seen that happen lately in news, and everyone's criticizing Boeing's CEO. They say, actually, you've done great for the shareholders because you massively reduced costs, but that did come at, had some really bad results as a consequence. So you kind of see that happen where you have someone who was very good at finances, just looking at the finances of the business, and then not actually focusing on what actually does matter for the business. So I guess it happens all the time.
There's another company I can talk about this because it was long ago, and also that company doesn't exist anymore. But I used to work for a car retailer, and they retailed several brands, including Fiat, Renault, and such like. And the way that deal works is you get so much for selling a car, you get so much for the finance, but also you get a bonus for hitting certain targets from the manufacturer. Now, this company, they kept their costs. I think it was quite a standard thing to practice at the time, but they kept their prices really low and their sales very high and relied on the bonuses as the profits. They made no profit on selling a car. They made it all on hitting these bonuses. So one quarter, they didn't make their bonuses. And what they did then is say, well, we're a big retailer of yours. You either pay us the bonus that we just missed. We're only a little bit off. So just pay us that. Otherwise, we're going to stop selling your cars. And they went, no, that's the deal. It's black and white. You don't hit that target, you don't get the bonus. They went, okay, well, we're not going to pay you for the cars that we bought. And they went, okay, well, we won't supply the cars that you bought. And they were so ignorant about this that they started trying to, basically were pushing. They fell flat. Because they were so focused on this, they ended up missing. I don't know whether it's because of that, but my belief is because they were so focused on this argument with one manufacturer. The next quarter, they ended up missing 3 bonus from 3 different manufacturers.
Ouch!
And suddenly, they were basically on stock with most of their suppliers. Liquidators came in and took V5s for all the second-hand cars on the lot as well. The company kept on selling. They were still taking deposits for cars, new cars, and they kept selling the second-hand cars they didn't even legally own anymore. Now, I remember the day that they actually made us all redundant, and because they got very nasty trying to force people out and leave. But, in the end, there was enough people stuck around that they had to give redundancy payments out. And the guy flew in on his helicopter, landed, came in, told us that we were all fired, and then flew off with his helicopter again. And it's like one of those where you're like, this is so stupid. You've lost the business out of this. But also you're like, and then you've just flown home in your helicopter, whereas, I no longer have my business car anymore. So it was,
Okay.
It's such a strange situation.
Well, it kind of brings me to another question, which is how do you see the UK market? Because all these companies have been in UK. You had tons of experience. Do you see it as a good place to launch a startup, to grow a business, or do you see there's a lot of gatekeepers, and it's quite hard to do a business in the UK?
So, do you mean to sell products in the UK or to get investments as being a base of operations?
I mean it as to actually launch the business and for the business to be successful. That's a combination of reaching out to investors and them investing in your company, but also to actually launch a new product and making sure that product is successful.
I would say there's positive and negatives, and some just kind of, I'm not sure whether there's anything particularly unique about the UK. So the positives are that there are a lot of government incentives and things like that for investors and therefore people who are seeking investment. So like SEIS and EIS, which, do you know what they are? Is it worth me giving a brief overview?
Yeah, no, look, we actually had an entire podcast on SEIS with Sam Simpson from Founders Catalyst.
Go and look up that podcast, listeners, because especially if you're looking for investment or have investment, because it's a damn good deal if you've got money to put down, right? And so there's benefits like that. There's all sorts of things like UK Innovation Fund and grants and stuff that's available. We've had, especially in the early days, we did a lot of work with the universities, which gave us a bit of a blast forward because we were quite a research and innovation based business. So till recently, the tax what's it called? R&D tax credits were really good. It's now almost impossible to actually get that money. As a business that actually does real R&D, obviously so many organisations are taking the mickey with it, but they made it so difficult now, it's just not even worth spending the time on, I don't think. Unless you maybe are, I'm sure there's situations where it is. So there's some benefits. I would say that the investment culture here, and I don't know how that is different to other countries, but the easiest one I compare it to, because it's the only one I know in any amount, is like the US investment world, especially tech investment world, where money seems to be a lot easier to get hold of and you can get a lot more earlier. In the UK, I'd say it's more conservative in terms of how much they're looking to put down and invest and risk. And it seems to be a lot more focused on who you know rather than what you know. So that can be good or bad depending on your situation. The amount of products I see funded that are fundamentally failed at the most basic level, in my opinion, of course, but then go on and completely fail. So and it's because they know the right people, and they it's not like some secretive thing. It's just that people trust who they know, and if you can help your friend out, you're going to, right? And I think there's maybe that little bit of an old school thing. So probably being white and male and going to school in certain schools, right, especially in particular universities and stuff, probably doesn't do any harm. Or having worked in a company in some blue chip with someone who's moved on to be an investor, all that kind of thing, that helps. So as someone who doesn't know those people, though as is white and male, so have some benefits there, it's I'd say that can be a challenge. Though saying that, there are some great funds set up for like women-owned or BAME-owned businesses and stuff now. So I think that is changing in a really positive way. But so I think it's a bit more conservative here. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. There's been some startups I've worked with where the biggest problem they had is they had too much money too early. There's one organisation in particular that raised 50 million without a product. It was 50 million seed level. And,
wow, that's very impressive.
They were gone within
let's see their pitch.
months. Yeah, I know. It was actually a genuinely good idea as well, and great people behind it. There was no actual real thing. I'm not going to go into the details of why it failed. What didn't help is that money came so easy to them, and there were so many noughts on the end that they kind of just every Friday, right, we're going down the pub now. Cars behind the bar. Eat and drink as much as you like, and I'm sure it barely put a dent into it. But I kind of do believe in that adage: if you don't look after the pennies, you have to look after the pennies and the pounds will follow, kind of thing. And even if you've got 50 million in the bank, of course, let's celebrate things. Let's have a treat for we need to get people motivated, and that there's no negative in that. But also, probably you shouldn't be looking up Bentleys and such like and buying yourselves nice cars. My dad, so I'm from a kind of an entrepreneur family. Every single member of my direct family has had their own business. And my dad, who's a retailer, has always said like the biggest sign a company is going to go under is when they go out and buy themselves fancy cars. And I don't know whether I completely, as someone who buys themselves fancy cars, not fancy ones maybe, but cars that I love anyway. I don't know whether I agree with that. But his point is when they start spending frivolously, they think they've made it and think they can't fail. That's normally when they start to lose grip. You know, they haven't actually established themselves enough to be able to go out and make these purchases. I don't think it's as simple as he makes out, but it's not a bad point, right? It's a good thing to keep in mind.
But it's hard, isn't it? I think, you know, when you're an entrepreneur, if you think about it, it's that fine balance between having a strong enough ego to deal with all the blows you're gonna get along the way, and then to actually say, you know what, I could spend this money on a nice Bentley or whatever it might be, or I can just keep it for a rainy day, continue driving, my Honda or something. It's a really hard thing to do. I mean, I've only seen one person do that, which actually Jeff Bezos was famously interviewed in his Honda Accord, I think, in 1999. And people said, you have so much money in your bank, why are you still driving the Honda? And he said, well, it still drives, why would I change my car? But it's a hard thing, huh?
No, and that's someone who really loves their cars. It is. I mean, but I sold my car to start cleanly, and that paid me to not work for about 6 months, and just as COVID hit as well, which didn't help. But of course, you know, if there's something you're passionate about and it makes your life richer and such like, I think it's when it's to show off, and there's that kind of phrase like "fake it till you make it," and well, actually, you know, what's better to do, or maybe if things are looking good, there is this perception that it's always going to be like that, right? And there's people I see. It's the same as people who win the lottery, or maybe they get a job that's is a lot of money at the time, and they spend it all. And it's not that you shouldn't enjoy life while you've got it. Absolutely, you should. And perhaps I should be a little bit more like that. I'm a bit more of a tight ass, unfortunately. My parents are both northern, and so maybe I've
there's a cliche.
Short arms, long pockets. But at the same time, you need to. I'm someone who's quite money anxious, so which is difficult as an entrepreneur, because the thing I find most stressful is not having enough cash in the bank. And I think everyone finds it stressful, but I really, I think I probably struggle with it more than a lot of people who are willing to like remortgage their house. I would never remortgage my house. I've never put my family at risk for business. My family is more important. Whereas a proper entrepreneur, I think, would probably take that risk and take that gamble on themselves. So I always have a backup.
It's a big gamble. But it's always a big gamble, isn't it? Because it's one thing, when you're taking a risk, it's one thing, like you said, to have a backup of a backup. And it's another thing to gamble things that are your necessities, your bare necessities. So if you put in the house and you do a second mortgage on a house to get money to invest in the business, that's a really big gamble. Not everyone can actually do that. Even mentally, it's the stress must be unbelievable.
For this business, I sold my car. I had a M6 and BMW, and it was a lovely car and such like. Not that I was really passionate about it, and I sold that to live on for the first like 3, 4, 5 months, and I left a very pretty well paying job to work on the business. So I missed out on that income for that period of time, and for a business that I knew wasn't going to be able to pay me for at least a good few years, if at all. And so that was a gamble, that was a risk. But I never ever put my family at risk there. We could live without that car. We had, an old banger that we could drive around in, the mortgage was still going to get paid, and I could always go back and find another job, and I would have missed out on that income in the meantime. That is my level of risk. But there's some people who will, remortgage their house, and like if it doesn't work out, that's, we lost the roof over our head, and people like that. That for me is the definition of what is an entrepreneur, someone who who's actually risk, goes out and I don't necessarily think it's the right thing to do or something that's necessary, or you won't be successful without that. Warren Buffett, for example, is a good example of someone who, famously he still goes and gets his McDonald's in the morning, and if the markets are down, he doesn't get. Is it something like he doesn't get like a drink? He only gets. He doesn't get a side or something like that if the markets are down. So he saves that extra 79 cents. So maybe that's a bit much. But
he's quite well off. I think he can probably afford that extra thing.
So. And I don't know how much of that is like marketing, like kind of personal marketing as well, So maybe that's because
But he also owns a share in all those companies, doesn't he? Because I think he owns a share in McDonald's and Coca-Cola and Dairy Queen and all those. So every time he goes and say, "Oh, this is what I eat every day," is it?
Yeah, I think that's probably the definition of built different, but probably not particularly healthy way of living either. But but I think because on the flip side, who was the other chap? Was it Sam Altman, who also was driving around an old banger? His company's worth billions, but at the end of the day, it was all a scam. So I don't know how much of that was actually real. Maybe he just didn't care about cars, but because he still had had a 12 million house in the Bahamas and such like. So he obviously wasn't completely anti-luxury. So I'm kind of a little bit. I don't think there's a set way of coming back to your original question. What makes a good leader? For me, what makes a good leader is someone who's honest, who really cares not just about themselves but about the team and the product they're building. The best people I've ever worked for have been passionate about delivering something, right? And you want to do that with them. You want to be part of that. You want to help them. You'll maybe push a little bit harder and go a bit further. And because if you think you're just paying for their new Mercedes or whatever, probably you won't be so focused on it. But if you can tell that, and I don't think it's something you can fake. You're either passionate about it or you're not. And that is a big motivator.
I was reading somewhere on LinkedIn that someone said that in the beginning of a startup, you need to be not only passionate, but you need to commit crazy hours. And if you're not willing to do either one of these two things, the startup will fail because the requirements you'll have in the beginning are absolutely ludicrous. Have you found this to be true as well? That intensity, that passion, that crazy hours?
Well, the thing is that in that regard, if you're passionate about it, it probably doesn't feel like work. You might be working on it in the evening or at the weekends and such like, but it's because you want to. I think there's a danger with as someone who's ADHD, I've got a great risk of burning out, and as I think a lot of people are, burnout is a real problem. And so for instance, with my staff, it may sound like a bit hokey, but I say, look, I'm paying you for 6 hours a day. And so we don't do like a 4-day week or a 5-day week. I'm paying you for 6 hours, 5 days a week. You can do those all on 3 days, or you can do them across 7 days. I expect 4 good quality hours per 6 hours. That's basically what I'm asking for. I don't expect you to be fully productive for those 6 hours. But I want you to be productive. And what I have found is that there is only so much time a human. These aren't business owners, of course. These are staff. But realistically, a human can only produce for so much time. Now, for me, as I mentioned, ADHD, I am super productive for 2 weeks, absolutely shit for 2 or 3 weeks, right? So
I also suffer from that amazing quality, so I know exactly what you're talking about. It's like, oh my God, he can do everything too. Well, he hasn't left the couch. What's wrong with him? So yeah, I know that.
Yeah. I used to say, I'm the most productive lazy person in the world. What's going on? And there's pre-diagnosis. So yeah, I know that I'm on it at the moment. I'll work through. Yeah, of course I will. But if I've got 2 kids as well, and fact life, and there's the stuff that needs to be done, and you need to balance those things out. But actually being more aware of that and not pushing myself too hard or saying yes to everything when I'm on means that for those 3 weeks, then maybe become more like 1 week, or maybe actually I'll be quite productive through that period as well. So I think there needs to be a balance, and individuals are different, right? Some people want to and can do. I wouldn't want to be somebody like, oh God, I'm blanking his name. Thingy Gates from Microsoft. How have I forgotten his name?
Bill Gates? No.
Bill Gates, that's it. I couldn't remember his first name. So Bill Gates, famously he used to sleep underneath the desks and such. Like, once again, I don't know how true these stories are, but this is what we hear. But yeah, he obviously built one of the most valuable businesses in the world, and it seemed probably to do that, he was probably hyper focused for a very long amount of time, and now is doing things very differently. But I think I'm probably, this is one of the reasons I'm not a business person in my mind, is probably once I'd made 10, 50 million, I would probably gone, right, well, that's probably enough now. I'm probably just turn it down a little bit and enjoy, before I have an aneurysm, but
Well, maybe
the
not,
worst
because
thing
you
would
like
be.
cars, so I'm sure you can find a car for that amount of money that you want to buy, right?
But if you gave me, a few £1 million now, I would still work because I love what I do. During COVID, I was starting Gleanly. So we got our first round of funding at the peak of COVID, which was a really interesting time for that to be happening. It's just do you remember when the stock markets were crashing and
Yep.
the lawyers are on the phone going, well, we're not sure about this. I'm like, look, get this closed because they're going to pull tomorrow, or money will be worthless. So we don't know what's going to happen. Let's just get it closed. And
Yeah.
but there was still. My wife suddenly was looking after her mum who was in terminal care and such like, and so I had quite a new baby under one arm, sorting out the investment on the other. But there were still good big periods at night where I was like, I put a film on, well, I'm not really interested. And a friend of mine, we started a charity platform called Wishy. And it was just because we were discussing one day, I was talking about the philosophy of giving and some of the challenges there is around charities. And we kind of came up with an idea about this on over the phone. I'm like, let's build it, and it only took us 2 weeks, but once again, it's that thing of like, there's a problem there. I think I know how to solve it. Well, let's go and give it a go. I can't let it go now, like a dog with a bone. So I can kind of understand that, working even if you don't need to, but there has to be a balance, doesn't there?
I was just about to ask you, how do you manage that? How do you create balance? Even having ADHD, it's hard to have that balance. And what support do you have around you that makes you keep that balance? Because it's not easy, is it?
No, absolutely. And I think things were a lot different before I had a family. I would work. I used to have a design agency years ago, and I'd quite often be there till 10, 11 o'clock at night, and maybe regret it the next day, maybe not be productive the next day. But I was quite young as well, but yeah, I didn't. It wasn't like I didn't have kids or wife to go home to, and that was different. So I think then it's your friends become very important, and having hobbies and interests outside of that. But even when it comes to work, I've always tried to have 2 projects on the go at the same time. And one of the reasons for that is, part of ADHD is procrastination. If there's something I need to do for Gleanly and I just can't bring myself to do it, normally the crazy security forms we have to fill out, just so many forms, right? I hate forms at the best of time, and these are the most boring things and so repetitive. I hate them. So they're really challenged and they're a blocker to me. So luckily I've got a good team around me now, so they do most of this. But so that's the other thing is offloading stuff, like knowing when you're just not the right person to do it, which is not always possible when you're a startup and you haven't got the cash to bring into other people. But yeah, moving on to something else. So if it's very easy to go onto YouTube or whatever you're interested in and do that instead and feel unproductive. And I think, actually sometimes you need to do that, and it's not necessarily a negative. Let's be unproductive for a bit. And, if it allows, one of the things I'm doing, I'm being kind to myself now understanding ADHD and how it affects me, is if I'm stuck with something, we'll just go and sit out in the garden or get the hot tub or go for a walk or something. And it's not productive at all, but it lets my rule of that though is my punishment for being unproductive is I'm not allowed any phones or digital or anything or book. I have to go in there with no inputs. You know what I mean? So I'll go and sit in the garden for an hour because I can't work right now. My brain's not letting me. But my punishment is I'm not allowed any distractions. Now, the good thing there is like positive boredom. I think one of the biggest problems with our age now, the world that we're in now, is there's always some kind of entertainment, there's always some kind of stimulus.
It's always on, yeah.
And the best ideas, the things that get me going are things when I force myself to be bored. So not every day. It used to be I used to make time every day, but I completely failed on that recently. Now it tends to be if I'm procrastinating, I'll go. Okay, you're fine not to work right now, but you're not allowed anything else either. So I'll sit there, and then of course 5 minutes later I'm like, I might just go and fill in that folder.
I think that's called meditation. When you have to do that, you just sit around in silence. Yeah.
Maybe it's like an informal form of meditation. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
I treat it as a punishment, but actually it's quite enjoyable. And I'll normally come up with, I'll have some idea of, oh God, I'm going to have to go and do this now.
Interesting. Daniel, as we're reaching the end of the podcast, if people want to reach out to you, how can they do so and find more about all the exciting things you're doing?
You can catch me on here, but also on LinkedIn as well, or through Cleanly. That's GLEAN.ly is my website.
Wonderful. Daniel, thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you.
I should have said open experts there. I didn't. I just said on here.
That's fine. That's fine.
It didn't even make sense.
This podcast is sponsored by OpenExperts.com. Open Experts is a place to go if you're looking to talk with top experts from around the world. That is open-experts.com. This podcast is also sponsored by startupnetworks.co.uk. Startup Networks, it's an online forum where you can find all the resources you need to run your startup, from grants to investors to tips and tricks on how to be successful in your startup. This podcast is also sponsored by ODEV Tech. ODEV Tech is your premier software development partner. Make sure you check them out at odev.tech.